Hey everyone, my name is Mike, this is Dirty Cook Studio, and this is Devtober Week 1, Part 2. So in Part 1, we prototyped the scene. We added a player with a rigid body and a collider, we added a temporary ground with a collider, and we also set up the input system for jump and attack. Today, what we're focusing on is just the ground. We want to take this ground, we want to rip it apart so that we can very easily add art to it. We also want to be able to instantiate it and spawn it as the ground moves. We want it to be able to move from right to left to simulate running. And we also want to be able to delete all of the ground that we can't see on screen anymore. So that is what we're going to be doing today. Let's jump into it. Alright, so one of the first things we're going to do is we're going to take this, we're going to bring it down to scale. We are also going to prefab it, and then this is going to make it so much easier for us to come in and then just change the sprite to make it look nicer as we instantiate it. What we want to do is we want to have all of our ground moving across the ground without us having to actually add it in. So we want to create a logic to spawn the ground before the player hits the ground. And we also want to have it move across, creating a spawn right about here and deleting it right about here. Alright, so what we've just set up is we've given the editor the ability to bring in the ground prefab. Then we're going to set up a list of our sprites. This is going to make it easier for us to change the color and shape of the ground programmatically. And then we've also set up a list for all of the ground because I want this script to know exactly where every single piece of ground is. Alright, so what this all says is that we are going to spawn the ground prefab at -3.5F, which is going to be just above the bottom. And I want it to spawn on the x-axis, starting at -20 all the way to 20. So let's see what that looks like. Awesome. So that gives a little more leeway than I necessarily want, but that spawns it exactly where we want it to spawn. With a little bit of leeway, because Sean and I have some cool ideas of what we want underneath the ground. So that works really well. So what we're going to do next is we're actually going to want this ground to move. And then we don't want the ground to run out, so we're going to instantiate more ground to fill it up. Alright, there we go. So we have some slow movement. We can increase that if we'd like to 5 or 50. Really get it going. And that is something that I'm sure Sean and I will test and debug as we move on. Maybe we could have some programmatic logic of it increasing speed as the level goes on, and this gives us the ability. So that's our move ground. right now we need to now fix this issue that we've caused where the player runs out of ground. Let's jump into that problem. This should do is, if for some reason there is no ground, spawn it. So if the last piece of ground that has been spawned, which is going to be spawned at 20, if that is 19, then we're going to spawn it at the last location plus 1, which is going to give us that distance. So it's going to be if the last square is at x19, we want to spawn something at x20. So that will hopefully give us the chain that we're looking for. And as always, gotta make sure that we tell the computer to do it. Alright, so the original spawn keeps working, and every time that this hits 19, it spawns another one at 20. So this is perfect. But the problem that we have now is that very soon, especially in an infinite runner, this is going to brick a computer. Well, maybe not a computer, but it's definitely going to ruin a mobile phone. So what we need to do is we need to then get rid of all of these without having to do that. Alright, so what this should say is that it's going to take the very first the very first index of this list. It's going to check to see if the x is less than 20, which is what we set over here. So if it is 21, negative 21f, we're going to delete it and we're going to remove it from the list. This is also why we use lists instead of arrays. Arrays are very heavy to resize, as where lists are not. So that is why we are using lists instead of arrays. Alright, perfect. So we can obviously have a little bit of adjustment, but for now, this is pretty much where we want it to be. Thank you so much for checking us out. That was Devtober Week 1 Part 2. Next part is going to be working on the Stats Manager, so we can dynamically change stats between the ground, the player's jump height, all of that. We want it dynamically set from a singleton Stats Manager. After that, we're going to be working on a Sound Manager and then menus, and that will finish off Week 1 of Devtober. We are a small independent studio. Any help and support would be much appreciated. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Follow us at dirtycookstudio.com. Thank you very much, and we will see you very soon.